Well, let me just run through Aristotle right quick because I want to give you at least one example of how this works. And I think I've said all of this. So these are the properties of pure consciousness that I've listed, 108 of them, and you can't read them all. So they're all. You've heard Marcy say these things 100 times. It's one, it's simple, it's unchanging, it's unbounded, it's infinite, it's eternal, it's silent, it's non-active, it's at rest, it's self-knowing, it's a state of unchanging being, and it's supremely blissful, unconditioned joy, total fullness, eternal peace, infinite beatitude. These are expressions that have been used by Maharishi and throughout history to describe this state. So I use this as a template, a kind of a criteria for identifying descriptions of pure consciousness. So I can make an evidence-based, experience-based, criteria-based inquiry. Yes? I'm sorry, you're going to have to use a mic if you wouldn't mind.
So is there a reason why you divided it into four different silence, being, consciousness, and bliss? Or is that
I'm sorry, could you say?
Is there a particular reason why you divided it into four? The reason why I'm asking is because you said there's 108, and in Jyotish there's 4 padas for each nakshatra, and that kind of goes into Jyotish. So that's why I was curious, is that why you split it into 4?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And the reason, well, these 3 on the right side are traditional Vedic, being, consciousness, and bliss. That's purely Vedic tradition. The one on the left, silence, refers to the experience of being at rest, subtle, one, simple, and so on. So I just arranged them that way because it seemed to be a very convenient way of grouping. And I used 108 because that's just cool, there's no reason for that really that I know of, except that
it's the natural law.
Anyway, I wanted to use this. I wanted a criterion so I can show Aristotle was describing a subset of that list, and he uses a subset of that list. Each person is unique, and they're all different. Each philosopher is different from the others in what they emphasize, but they all use a subset of that list or its equivalent expressions to describe pure consciousness. And that's why you can say this is a criteria-based, evidence-based inquiry into the people who've described pure consciousness. It's not my opinion. I'll show that they all use a subset of this list. And that makes it a kind of an objective inquiry, as much as possible for any kind of research in the humanities anyway. And so that's the program that I set out for myself many years ago. I had an experience of pure consciousness, of transcending, that came up spontaneously in my 3rd year of university studies. And I had no anticipation or expectation that it was possible to experience anything like this. I'd been studying day and night for about 4 or 5 days, and suddenly all the exams were over, and I went home and sat down leaned up against a pillow on my bed, and instead of going to sleep, I just spiraled down into this infinite, unbounded consciousness. And this was years before Maharishi was even heard of in the United States, especially my little town in the South, where nobody had ever heard of anything about consciousness. And so it was like I was totally blown away. And first thing I wanted to know when I came out, has anybody before experienced this? Has anybody experienced it? And about 8 years later, I discovered that Maharishi described this state. And then I came to MIU, and I had about a year to go very deeply into knowledge. And I found out that literally hundreds, Well, first I started out with Aristotle, who describes the infinite. He talks about the absolutely simple and unified consciousness that is conscious of itself throughout eternity. And he says, we enjoy this state in our best moments. Well, now, nobody knows that. Nobody in the Western world knows that. Descartes says at the end of the third meditation, no, I'm going to put down my pen. I'm going to close my eyes. I'm going to stop up my ears and eliminate as much of my thinking, or stop as much of my thinking as I can, in order to get to know better who I am. And when my mind wanders off on a thought, he said, I'm going to gently bring it back to the self. Does that sound familiar? Of course, you recognize that language. We gently bring the mind back to the self. And Descartes then says that this was the most glorious experience he'd ever imagined it was possible in this lifetime. And then he describes it. It uses those terms: one, simple, unchanging, eternal, unbounded, and so on. All of the, a subset of that list. And Kant, you would think, was a pure intellectual. That's how he's understood in the West. Immanuel Kant, his biographer says that he sat in meditation for an hour in the morning and an hour in the evening. What was he doing? Was he meditating, thinking about things, preparing lectures? No, he says, I'm going to direct my attention from experience, perceptual experience, to the universal and necessary conditions of any possible experience. And what is that? He describes it. It's one simple, unchanging, primordial, pure consciousness. And he says, I'm going to name this the transcendental unity of apperception. What is apperception? Leibniz defined it as the consciousness that is conscious of itself. So he's talking about a one simple, unbounded, eternal, a primordial consciousness that's conscious of itself. And it's the transcendental unity of all experience. Well, you can go through the whole history of philosophy and you'll find many more of these. Whitehead talks about, he doesn't use the word settling the mind, he talks about the subsiding of turbulence. And this enabled him to go into this world of eternal, but you have to go down to a very deep level of the self, to the finest level of activity and beyond, to experience. And on that level, consciousness is there, knowing itself. And it's completely not in space and time. It's not finite. It's not my consciousness. It's the consciousness at the basis of all individual life.